Hey, what's up guys, and welcome to the second episode of BluTech. It's a series where we take a deep dive into the world of tech with a key focus on how that piece of tech affects our day-to-day lives. It's kind of like a tech video, but with a men's lifestyle focus. Today, I wanted to talk about the ultimate camera setup in order to take amazing portraits of either yourself or someone else. You know those awesome pictures on Instagram you see where the person is super sharp, super in focus, and they have this amazing blown out background? You know? Well, knowing how to do this and what's involved will instantly separate your photos from anyone else's. There's a huge step up in the quality feel of a portrait that has a blown out background versus one that doesn't, unless of course the one that doesn't has been done so for whatever specific reason. So I'm gonna let you know what I recommend, and of course we're gonna get into it and talk more about it, but to put it simply, I would recommend a 50mm lens with the ability for the aperture to open up to at least 1.8. And as I said, we're going to explain what all of that means as we get into this video. So you want to take a portrait with a really blown out background. The first and most important thing to understand is that the body of the camera itself has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of blur created in a photo. In fact, a camera body itself has very little to do with the quality of a photo in general. Of course, it does have something to do with it, but not nearly as much as people think. All the good stuff, all that photo crispiness, that amazing blown out background, all of that comes down to the lens, not the camera body. See, I can't tell you how many times people ask me for a camera recommendation because they like the blown out look of my photos, the blown out background, the sharp foreground, but you're not looking for a camera recommendation, you're looking for a lens recommendation. Now, of course, a camera body does play into quality to a certain extent. How many megapixels a camera has, for example, can determine how far in you can crop into a photo without losing any detail. A more expensive camera typically has a better autofocus system. A more expensive camera can typically process color a little bit better. The best way to think about it is to think about a camera body as a computer. You can upgrade a PC to perform better, to handle more intense graphics, to just generally be more powerful, and that's the same concept with the camera body. But when it comes to the beauty and look of a photo, that is all in the lens. So with that in mind, let's talk about what makes that beautiful background blur that makes portraits look so good, and I've got one word for you: aperture. Aperture serves two main purposes: the amount of light that the camera lets in from the outside world, and the amount of blur, which is more professionally known as bokeh, that an image can produce. The lower the aperture number is, the more light the camera is letting in, and the blurrier your backgrounds will be. For example, this is my go-to portrait lens. This is the lens that I film most of my videos on. Not today's video, but most of them are filmed on this, and this is my 50mm 1.4 lens. And that 1.4 number basically means that the aperture on this lens can open up to 1.4, which is letting in tons of light and creating tons of background blur. Background blur, again known as bokeh. So my lens can open up to 1.4, as I mentioned, and it can close down to 16. What you're seeing here is the aperture blades opening and closing. When I make it wide open like so, it's letting in a lot of light and it'll produce bokeh. This is at f1.4. Now when I close it down, we're raising the aperture, and on this lens the max is f16. Now the hole that allows light in is much smaller, and you'll have much more of your scene in focus. So here, I'll show you exactly what this looks like. Here's a picture of original shot at f1.4. You can see how shallow that depth of field is, and your eye is immediately drawn to the focus of the photo, which is original by BluMaan. Now we're not going to move the camera at all, but we're going to change the aperture from 1.4 to 16. As you can see, we've got a lot more in focus. It's much harder to force the eye to one specific area of the photo, since it's not as isolated as in the previous shot. Now the exact same happens to photos of either yourself or your friends, so check this out. Here's a picture of me taken at an aperture of 1.8. Really nice background blur. Your eye is immediately drawn to the subject in the middle, which is me. And here's another picture. Nothing has changed except the aperture, which is now at f10. And again, I can't stress this enough, this is all because of the lens of the camera, not the body. So with all of that explained, let's go ahead and get into some recommendations for the ultimate setup to up your Instagram game and take amazing portraits. My go-to camera is the Sony A7rii matched with my 50mm 1.4 lens. That said, I've been doing this YouTube thing for a while, so my kit is definitely on the more pricier edge of the spectrum. I absolutely love my kit, and if you want to just bite the bullet and go all in, I will link my kit in the description down below. But what's more important than that is getting a 50mm lens, and not this specific 50mm lens, just a 50mm lens that has the ability to have the aperture open up really wide, and there's a lot out there on the market. I would recommend picking up a 50mm prime lens, and prime basically means that it is stuck at 50mm forever. So it's not going to be able to zoom in, zoom out. This is a 50mm lens, and it will always and forever remain 50mm, nothing else. But the benefit is that prime lenses typically have the ability to have that aperture open up really wide and get those really blown out backgrounds. Most zoom lenses out on the market can't open up as wide as a prime lens unless you're ready to spend a couple $1,000s for something really top notch. A prime lens often has the ability to create that amazing bokeh but not break the bank. So I'll leave you with 3 recommendations for those of you who want to up your photo game, maybe get your Instagram looking really nice. So these are 3 camera recommendations that are on the more budget side. And just keep in mind, I would recommend getting a 50mm prime lens with each of these recommendations. My first recommendation, and this is my favorite out of the 3, that is the Sony A6300. Sony has the A6500 out now as well. It's a little bit newer, but it's quite a bit more expensive. And to be honest, the A6300 is already packed with loads of features. Coming in at around $750 to $800, depending on where you pick it up. It is it's the most pricey recommendation on this list, but it is jam-packed with features. Great built-in stabilization. You got 24.2 megapixels to play with. You got 4K video recording, and you got full HD at 120 frames per second slow motion. The 50mm 1.8 lens that goes with that camera will bring the total cost to about $1,000 altogether. Next recommendation is the trusty Canon T6i. And one of the biggest selling points of Canon is how many lenses they have. And they have a ton of lenses. And the 50mm 1.8 lens option that you have with the Canon camera is the cheapest on this list, coming in at about $125 for the lens, which is a great price for something that can open up to 1.8. Finally, the cheapest camera on this list is the Panasonic G7, coming in at about $600 for the body itself and about $150 for the 50mm 1.8 lens. The G7 can take great pictures and also can shoot in 4K, which is pretty amazing considering the price point. Again, my personal choice would be the Sony A6300. It's a little bit pricier than the others on this list, but it is jam-packed with features. I bought it from my brother last Christmas. He loves it. It's a great camera. Everything that we've talked about can be found linked down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see everybody next time.